the Baen Free Radio Hour.
Hello and welcome to the Baen Free Radio Hour. Today on the show, Sean Patrick Hazlett interviews John Ringo and Casey Moores about Not That Kind of Good Guy, the first in John's supercharged superhero series, Shadow's Path. After that, we bring you part 11 of the serialization of Mark Van Name's John and Lobo novel, One Jump Ahead.
Welcome. You're listening to the Baen Free Radio Hour podcast. I'm your host, Sean Patrick Hazlett. I'm here with John Ringo and Casey Moores. John, how you doing, my friend?
Oh, well, it's morning on Sunday, so I'm awake. I have coffee, so that's how I'm doing.
Yeah, I just got mine too. Just, good old-fashioned Dunkin', so.
Can you see what it is?
Nice.
Nice. All right, so Not That Kind of a Good Guy.
Yeah.
What's this all about, John? Where'd this idea come from?
This idea actually came from one of the issues that Casey mostly has had to deal with is the fact that this was a mash of several different ideas that I had. And it came from a number of different sources because it's a mash. But I had an idea for this one particular character that I knew I couldn't write, which was a character that was actually in South Chicago and was a gangbanger, was a black gangbanger. And that character started talking to me one summer very loudly. I wanted to tell a story. And I realized that in the current political environment, I could not tell that story. Mm-hmm. So later, this other character started talking to me about his story of growing up in the ghetto. Now, he's a white guy growing up in the ghetto in Baltimore. And I talk about it as characters telling me their stories as opposed to I am a writer. Sometimes I feel like I just dictate a story. And there were a bunch of these stories that had certain breakpoints, different directions as they went. And eventually I took a couple of them and shoved them together. And one of the things about it is that there are certain aspects of the first book, Not That Kind of Good Guy, which seem like they're a sequel. Like there's a lot of things applied in it. There's a very major character that's referenced, Mama, but you never meet Mama. And there's all these things in his backstory that are referenced that they're public knowledge that don't make any sense because I had ideated the backstory as heavily as I ideated the front story, if you will. So that's one of the things that Casey had to deal with was there's just these references to stuff like it's a sequel. Because I had the backstory so thoroughly ideated. The very beginning of that story is really where there are fractals that go off in all sorts of different directions. And I have talked on my Substack about some of the other ideas that had happened with that. This is the story that ended up being written. So that's where it came from. It came from a whole bunch of different directions.
And for folks who are watching or listening, just so they can find your Substack, what's the Substack address?
It's Ringo's Tavern. If you look on Substack and look for Ringo's Tavern. But the story is about a kid who was a white kid who was left in an alleyway by his mother in Baltimore as a baby, like he still had his umbilical cord attached. That's the story that he's had his whole life until the events in the book. And it is a mash of a whole bunch of stuff together. So saying what is this story about gets a little complicated because it's a conspiracy story. It's a cyberpunk. It's a superhero story. and it is let's see, and it even has a little touch of what most people would call urban fantasy because there's some religious stuff in it, having to do with angels and demons. So it's an interesting mash, but the main character is kind of a super character, and I freely admit that. The main character is incredibly intelligent and for his age, very highly educated, because he's had access to the internet. And he's, back in the 80s, one of the other books I wrote that some people may be aware of is the Monster Hunter International Memoirs. In that there was a character called Chad Gardenier. He's super smart, he's super capable, and he just loves being a monster hunter. But Chad never, at first, did not go to college because he didn't have access to it. This was the 1980s. You had to physically go to a physical college to get college education. That's not the case anymore. So Michael ended up going to, there are online universities, and I'm not talking about like Phoenix and that sort of thing. There's something called Coursera, and then because I wasn't too sure if they wanted me to use the name, I called it Xterra or something like that.
Right.
But Coursera, you can use Coursera to take college credit to audit college courses at all sorts of universities like Stanford and Harvard and all these other universities. And so he started doing that fairly early on. Nobody learns calculus when they're 7. I actually know somebody who has a kid who derived calculus from just looking at a stream when they were 7 years old. So he's an unusual character, but because I've met a lot of unusual people, I do not consider him an impossible character. He's simply an unusual character. But he is a super character, no question. Plus, he is involved with an organization called Gondola, which is a secret conspiracy to essentially save the world from itself often. And they are opposed by the society, which is 300-year-old conspiracy, which has been trying to overthrow democracy for 300 years. And then you throw in superpowers.
As one does.
I mean,
but it's a very politically incorrect book. And here's the thing, from the point of view of all sorts of different politics. Okay. It's one of these where, my politics are not the politics of my characters. This character's politics do not fit right or left at all well. Because among other things, he was raised in a ghetto. And so he sees that, from a different perspective, because he sees that there's a lot of evil in the ghetto, but there are a lot of people who in some ways are better because they are surrounded by evil, but they remain good. And he's one of these people who really should have just been, like, his first line, and it's an important line, is, I should have just jacked a car.
Yep.
And the reason that's so important, that line says so much about him, is that he was in a life and death situation. What made the most sense was for him to steal a car so he could get out of town so that he would not be in the firefight that he's in. But his morality would not allow him to actively, some poor person would never get their car back. Right? So this is a guy who has this very, very strong sense of morality. But that strong sense of morality does not include not killing bad people. He's perfectly fine with that, right? This guy is not Batman, okay? This guy would have killed the Joker okay, well, that's done, right? He's more like the old-fashioned Captain America, right? Who would just, if he had a bad guy to deal with, he just shot him. So he's not that kind of good guy. There you go.
Yeah, especially MS-13, right? He loves dispatching MS-13.
Oh yeah, doesn't have a single problem with it, and refers to them as, I'm not sure how comfortable you are with language on this, but he refers to them as little brown tattooed fuckers. Um, and
He numbers them.
Yeah.
The opening
What
scene-
LBTFs, something like that.
LBTF 13,
LBTF,
LBTF 14.
yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the opening scene is sort of narrated in his head. It's a very John Wick scene. He's 13 years old and he's John Wicking. Okay.
Mhm.
And the scene is narrated in his head, and he's not only referring to them as little brown tattooed fellows, he's also referring to them as and then Latino stunt extra number 6 came around the corner. So he is not a politically incorrect. He's not a politically correct guy at all. He's sort of he's sort of a white Dave Chappelle at certain points. But on the other hand, he has a very nuanced view of like trans, because the lady that was closest thing in his life to a mother growing up is this 6'4" black transvestite street hooker, right?
Mhm.
Who is like, yes, I am a woman, but at the same time, I know damn well I'm a man. Yes, I am a woman, but at the same time, I know damn well I am a man. You know, I don't go for that. Oh, I am truly a woman. Yeah, like when I go to the doctor, I'm like, yes, doctor, I am a woman, but just treat me like a man, right? And that's his mama, okay? And you don't, you don't diss his mama. So that's sort of where you're at the beginning of the book, and then there's all these reveals that are sort of what? There's a certain amount of explanation of the reveals, because it's kind of because there's good guys. Everybody is like, yeah, we kind of have come to the conclusion that there's a conspiracy of bad people trying to ruin the planet, but nobody really believes that there might be good guys out there. And they're very clear that they're not that kind of good guys either. They're perfectly comfortable with killing bad people too. So it's that's what it's about. What's next?
Now, in terms of the the way that I guess superpowers or abilities work in this kind of
most of them are
building.
Most of them are based around the elements: earth, air, fire, water. Then there's electricity. There are invulnerable grounds and invulnerable flyers. I'm trying to think of, is there any others? There are telekinetics, but there are no telekinetics in the United States. One of the other things about the powers is that if you use the powers, you become more powerful. If you don't use the powers, you don't become more powerful. And because of an incident which occurred way prior to his birth, actually occurred in the late 1990s.
The Nebraska killer or something like that?
The Nebraska killer. Because of that, they kind of put an unofficial but yet official prohibition on working your powers too much. And you gain them more earlier than you use them. So the most powerful person is the person who is the head of the Super Corps and also the Secretary of Super Affairs, California Girl. And California Girl is very powerful because right at the beginning, when she got the power of flight, she's flying around to LA in a homemade cheerleader costume. And because she flew so much, and because of air resistance, she became more powerful. And when the powers first started to manifest in the late 1960s, early 1970s, and they manifested randomly throughout the world, and they didn't manifest very rapidly. One of the whole backstory thing to the whole universe is that the powers didn't manifest in people completely randomly. They manifested in people initially who would be looked at within their culture as leadership types. They manifested in stereotypes. So, for example, the first manifestation in India was in the son of some academics who were very ascetic, and he was raised very ascetic. So he is one of these very guru sort of fellows who is very intelligent. He has a doctorate in physics. And so he leads through the soft power of the example of being a Hindu stereotype of the teacher, the guru. And so he is highly respected for that. The first person to manifest them in the United States was just the classic American Captain America guy. He's this kid from Nebraska. He's very patriotic and everything else. Now he ends up in special operations. But he's very much, he is that kind of good guy. He is the modern image of, or at least the 20th century image of the good guy. The problem being that while he has, by the time these things happen, gotten a little bit cynical, he's not naive by any stretch of the imagination. He couldn't imagine the amount of betrayal that occurred to that occurred, which was what drove him insane and turned him into the Nebraska killer. So the next leader that we got from whoever is sending these powers, which very, very clearly is not God, G-O-D. The powers are coming from somewhere. The next real leader that we got was this kid who was raised in the ghetto, who is as paranoid as you can possibly be, who is as cynical as you can possibly be, and yet at the same time, at the core, is a good guy. But he's a good guy who is not here to be the super patriot Captain America. He's much more Deadpool. While at the same time having that Captain America strain in him. So he's not that kind of good guy, right? He's all about killing bad people. I mean, like he's into it, right? Okay. Does that cover it?
Yeah. So that definitely answers kind of how the superpowers work in this world.
Yeah.
In terms of, yeah.
There's also electricity. Yeah. So there's that's it. There's the main elements: air, earth, fire, water, electricity, metal, invulnerable flyers, invulnerable grounds, and telekinetics. That's it. That's the complete list. And the thing about it is, all of them at a certain level are telekinetics. They just don't realize it. And the invulnerable grounds, the invulnerable flyers are definitely telekinetics, which means that they should be able to project their telekinetic power. But because they don't train it, they don't have the capability. There was a point to that. Yeah, so like the first one that we were talking about, the Nebraska killer, he was a Metallo. And Mike is an earther. But in the case of the matter manipulators, they are able to do all sorts of things with the material which is defined as earth. And there's all sorts of stuff that is defined as earth, but technically they're not supposed to do anything with metal, with formed metal, even though earth, the crust of the earth, is mostly aluminum and iron. So one of the things, if you train, is you can figure out how to actually manipulate aluminum and iron and all sorts of other stuff. So over the course of the books, he becomes, he figures out that there are things that you can do with this power that even the Indian Vishnu didn't, because he's only got partial training in it. So he doesn't know what isn't possible. And he's really, really smart. So he figures out all of this stuff that they're like, hang on a second, you're an earther. You can't control air and water as well. He's like, I can't? I thought you guys did that.
No, elements.
Huh?
They're
just elements. So he eventually becomes referred to as the Lord of the Elements, which comes in much later. One of the things I don't know if you're going to ask about it, but one of the things is when they acquire their powers, every super in their local language hears words in their head. The storm
is coming.
Yeah. They don't know what the storm is. So naturally, being a John Ringo book, at a certain point, the storm does come and bad things happen. So that's it. Next question.
Now, In terms of, again, this is more of a kind of a world building question.
Yeah.
The kind of environment you alluded a little bit to Gondola, but there's like another organization too that's kind of generally in charge of these supers. If you could talk a little bit about that and how they operate in this world.
Well, the supers can be independent, but they're heavily pushed to be part of what is should be described as a quasi police department called the Super Corps, which is run by the Federal Department of Super Affairs. And Super Corps is essentially a pretty ineffective organization. So they do a certain amount of arresting people using superpowers, but really they're just sort of beat cops that that wander around using their superpowers as just regular police. And when you transition, it is encouraged that you move to either New York City or Los Angeles to be a member of the Junior Super Corps, which is definitively not a police organization. He refers to it as the Spangly Tights Brigade. And really the Junior Super Corps in New York and LA were just used to getting dropped off on a Saturday at the park and having people take their pictures. And then they would wander around trying not to get into trouble. Once Mike arrives, that changes. Mike,
surprising.
He's sent out to be a super what's it called? Angel, or guardian angel. Because he's like, all that we are is a gang. Okay. We got no police authority. Okay. We got no controlling legal authority. We're just another gang. So, if they're going to drop us off here, I'm not just going to wander around having my picture taken and then try to stay out of trouble. I'm going to actually do something, which is just a whole crazy thought to these other kids, right? So he goes around, I won't say getting into trouble, but definitely annoying the drug dealers in the park. Using his superpowers to find their hidden drugs and confiscating them. And the rest of the gang is like, because that's what they are. They're just a gang. The other thing about the superpowers is that they're gendered. And that's kind of an ongoing debate, because one of the members that's already there, the Junior Super Corps, is Jorge. And I get his name wrong all the time. I think it's Hermano de Poder.
Hombre de Poder.
Yeah. Huh?
Hombre de Poder. Yeah.
Hombre de Poder, which is Power Man. And he is this tiny little Guatemalan who's 14 years old at the beginning of the books, and is the runt in his family. And Guatemalans tend to run short. So Mike in his head calls him Power Dwarf. And it's an insult to call the invulnerable grounds a Hulk, right? Oh no, you can't call them a Hulk because that's stereotyping. So he calls it Hulk-A.
Right.
Then the heir in the team is
Fresh Breeze.
Laura, right?
Laura, yeah.
Laura. And see, one of my problems that I've had writing lately is I've always had a hard time with names, and now I'm constantly forgetting my character name.
That too. Yeah, it's ever.
But he calls her Febreze because she's obviously got a stick of it shoved up her butt. And she's the social justice warrior who is the complete pimpo who knows absolutely nothing except all this social justice stuff. And then Mike is like constantly taking a spoke and sticking it in their wheels.
So she's able to tell you all 72 genders and this and whatnot.
Oh yeah,
Mike,
and
I'm sure.
and
Yeah.
she's the one who is all about like getting her picture taken by everybody, and doesn't you're having to drag her away from all the paparazzi. And she's like, da, 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 da. And Mike's like, except for this, and she's like, but. And then the guy who ostensibly is in the lead is Metal Storm. And that the problem with that name is that I literally, after I'd written the first book, one of the founding membership Substack subscribers, I made an open offer for anybody who had a founder to put a name in the book, put their name or put somebody's name that they wanted, and they wanted one of their kids in there. So I changed the Metal Storm's name, and I can never remember if the new official name is Josh or Drew.
Well, it's then the first book. It's definitely Josh, and I think I've been changing them in the second book. So I hope that's what was supposed to be there.
Okay.
Okay. The first book is definitely Josh. Hope that worked out correctly.
So anyway, he's a Metallo, and Mike calls him Easy because he's about the most non-metal guy you will ever meet. He's a total prep. His dad went to Harvard. His dad's a Harvard-trained lawyer. He's going to Harvard, right? All this other stuff. And it's like, so you've got this, you not only have one of the things about it is we need to increase the diversity of the super core. Well, first of all, you don't get to decide who's a super, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Second, it literally crops out randomly. It is almost perfectly distributed in terms of gender
Population.
population in the United States in terms of different race and everything. And did we leave in the whole conversation where Tony, who's the head of the New York office, is explaining to California Girl how now that they found out that Mike is half Native American, it makes him, or a quarter Native American. He's like, we're almost at perfect gender because we've got Lightning Eagle, and now we've got Stone Tactical, but Stone Tactical is only a quarter Native American, so I don't know if that means we have 1 1/4 Native Americans or if it counts for 2 Native Americans.
How do we check
intersectionality math, not my strength. But there are a lot of just characters in the book. It's a very character-driven.
You get just Elizabeth Warren it, right? 1/16 check. It's 100% done.
Oh, well, no, it's like Tony is this. Tony, the head of the New York office, Italian Falcon, is he's an Italian paisan from Staten Island, and his father was a sergeant in the NYPD, and he is a natural sergeant. This is not a guy who should ever be in an executive position, right? But because he's an invulnerable flyer, and of course the flyers get all the important positions, because he's an IF, and because he is a long-term friend of the Secretary of Super Affairs, he is the head of the New York office, and he hates the job. All he wants to do is just fly and be like a sergeant position. And instead, he's stuck in an office all the time, having to do paperwork and handle interpersonal drama and all of that stuff. And he just hates the job. But he's also like totally infatuated with California Girl. So he's her dog. And California Girl is the classic affluent white female liberal who longs on to every social justice thing that comes along.
The latest thing, right? The latest thing
is, and is not at all a person who should be Secretary of Super Affairs, and she's been Secretary of Super Affairs for some very long period, through multiple administrations, because it's not written into the book and explained, but the Secretary of Super Affairs is supposed to be normals who are, it's like civilian control of the military. It's a normal, a non-super who is in control of the super affairs in the United States. As it turns out, it's actually her secret identity. It's California Girl's secret identity. So anyway, continuing on. Next question.
Yeah, in terms of like some of the themes that emerged while you were writing this book, what would you say the most dominant themes were?
The dominant themes in this book are, one of the problems was because it was a mash, several themes came together. One of the themes is even in really bad times, it is possible to be both really, really, I'll phrase it as violent and moral at the same time. And I don't really sit down and try to like teach people in my books. You know, I don't try to preach to people, but at the same time, I find that a lot of people say that they learn things from my books. And if there's anything that you can learn from it, is it doesn't make you a bad guy to be violent. It makes you a bad guy to be violent without purpose. Mike is not violent to just be violent. He is very focused in what he is violent about. And he is very, in his form of morality, he's very moral about what he's violent about. He doesn't see violence qua violence as being evil. He sees it how you use it as being evil, or for that matter, theft. The other theme that comes from it is that no matter how dark it gets, keep fighting. And you know, those are sort of the thematics of it. And the other thing is that there are good guys out there, and you might not know about it. So not everybody is just on Facebook and X sounding off about their politics. There are people out there that are working a little bit more quietly. But Casey hasn't said anything.
Well, Casey, what's your role in all this?
My role here was kind of the cleanup guy. Obviously, John had his ideas; he mashed them together, like he said, and so. And then, as we want him to do, we kind of wanted John to continue working and continue developing, creating. So I was kind of just the cleanup for the series. Actually, went back, clarified things where, like I said, he'd sort of mashed some things together, and some things on my first read through I totally missed. So I tried to make sure those things were emphasized so that readers remembered them and knew they were important later on. Added descriptors to scenes, things like that. So that was just kind of, and then beyond that, I'm also just sort of the administrative person. The way that I like to phrase it is I kind of do the things that no author really wants to do. We don't want to go back. You know, I am an author. I've got 10 published books out there, several dozen short stories. I know that I don't want to go back and re-edit after I've been writing, because that can be the worst part of it. And that can be kind of the drag. So that's the part that I've been taking on so that John can continue, you know, marching forward and creating the things that he creates. So yeah, I had to, you know, in some cases people got renamed and I had to sort through that and make sure that we were carrying one name.
I am terrible about forgetting names and close that using new names for characters. That is something that has been consistent. I think the only character that I ever actually managed to get the name right every single time was Roger. But other than that, I just call everybody Mike in case you haven't noticed. But yeah,
I'm starting to put a kibosh on people named Edwards. Actually, I'm gonna have to rename a couple people in the second book.
Yeah.
It's all right. We got
names.
It's just the details. It's just details like that I'm trying to clean up. And you know,
I referred to Casey as being a super editor. There was also a lot of repetition in the book. I repeated some things too many times. And there was a final edit that I wanted to do that didn't actually make it into the book, unfortunately. You know, so he came in and he did a lot of cleanup, and thank God, because I went back over it a couple of times going, and I'd get lost in cleaning the stuff up. So he was he was a lot more structured about it than I was.
Yeah, and for the most part, any author does. Going back through the things that they've written, your brain is still attached to to those scenes and the structure and some of those finer details, and you kind of can't step back. So that was really my purpose here.
Yeah, and when I was trying to edit it, I was already working on the future books, and so all sorts of stuff was just mashed together in my head, which I'm still working on pushing this particular series forward. I think I've got more books written in this series than any other series I've ever written.
You cranked quite a bit out. I'm playing a lot of catch up right now.
Yeah, I think I'm up to like book 7, but 2 of the books are only like half. And that's like post Lean, including all of the collaborations, is like 11. So I'm further along on this one than I've been on any other series.
John, when did you start this series? I mean, you're at book 7 already?
2023, except I wrote almost all of them in 2023 and 2024.
Oh my God. Like, is it just like a hot...
I wrote most of them in about 5 months in 2023. And since then, I have written 2 other things. But I hit a certain point. I actually created a world that I didn't want to destroy. I had to figure out how not to destroy the world and still have it be the main character is saving the world. And
I'm glad you recognized that. I was afraid that you were going to go the path that you usually go, and it kind of wasn't what this series needed. So it wasn't where people. I don't think it's where readers are going to want this series to go. So I think you made a great call in that respect. That was a good recognition on your part.
And there's stuff that I have to go back, and the last book that I've got written, there's stuff that I have to go back and change. There's stuff I have to go back and change in terms of character, not in terms of the world. Like, because I skipped part of a book, which might still get written, there's not enough about, and I skipped 2 years. So you get up to a certain point, and then there's a 2-year break, and then the Storm books start. And in that 2-year break, one of the things I have to explicate is that it's certain things having to do with his family and that sort of thing, which I don't really want to get into because that's future books, and people will have questions about it. Having read these books, so I don't want to give too much away.
Casey, do you have a sense of what the release schedule for these future books might look like? Like, this book's coming out. I'm not sure when this is going to air, but it's going to. We're talking in April. This is going to be out in May.
In May, yeah.
I have my copies. Did you get your copies?
No, I don't think that I have.
Okay.
So, no. But we're on a schedule for me to close out the next book by, I believe, the end of July, and to be closed out on the 3rd book by the end of January. We just closed this one out sort of January leading into February, so that's a 3 or 4 month turnaround. So I'll guess, I don't know the actual schedule for the releases, but I'm going to guess another 5 to 6 months for each.
Can we pause for just a moment?
Yeah.
Right. Just give me a minute.
Hold on. All right.
Okay, so that brief break, which we'll see if Sean can figure out how to splice together. I just wanted to grab the book because I already got my copies. So you can see the cover, Sean's got it up. And I just got to say that I've had a lot of good covers in my time. I freaking love the cover because it really gets the character. If Mike could have glowing eyes, he would have glowing eyes. No question. So I enjoyed writing the book, and I think that people will enjoy reading the book. This is a very, if somebody is a John Ringo just aficionado, has read, I've read absolutely everything you've ever published, even the fairly obscure stuff. I mean, if you've ever read Travails from with Mama, it's, that's the obscure stuff. This is a character that is just unlike anything I've ever written before, which is one of the things that was required a little bit of cleanup because he can be a motor mouth and then not a motor mouth. His dialect goes all over the place because he was raised in a ghetto, but he's also taken all of these very, very high level college courses. So he can drop the ghetto slang, but then when he talks about the ghetto, that slang comes back. So that's doing dialect is very difficult. It's very difficult to edit. And apparently we're going to be doing something that's kind of above audible. I can't remember what it was that Casey sent me, where they're talking about, are there any references, is there any, are there any lyrics in your book? Well, yeah, at a certain point he starts singing Memory from Cats. And he's, there are references to music. When I did the Substack, it actually had links to YouTube videos of all of these different songs that are sort of thematic for that particular chapter. That's just, but the thing is, that's just in the first book or two. And so this is a very, very different character. This is the closest it comes to is Chad Gardenier. But one of the things that Mike is Mike is looking for, he doesn't want to be the jump from bed to bed. He rejects that entire concept. Whereas Chad was he was the 80s guy. It was just, how often could you get laid? That was the deal in the 80s. Whereas Mike is, I'm looking for a wife and I'm going to settle down. I'm going to get married early and we're going to have kids. Which is a fairly common modern mimetic among a certain strain of males. So he is a very, very different character.
That's true, but it's also still, this occurred to me the first time I read through, it's still exactly what your fans are going to like, the core John Ringo fans are going to love. I mean, everything, he's a different character than you've written for the most part, but it's still everything that they love about John Ringo books, if that makes sense. But as I try to quantify it, I'm sort of losing words here. His breadth of knowledge, like his high level of intelligence, but the way that he'll still twist that on people and use it to his advantage, like you said, he'll slip in and out of those dialects. The way that he can sort of quickly assess and analyze just everything that everybody's going for, what their purpose is, who they are, how he can approach them differently. Thought that was all very well done, but ultimately the thematic progression of the book, that's exactly what your fans love.
No, I mean, when I say that he's a different character, he does hold certain of the traits that a lot of my characters, most of my main characters hold certain traits, which are, he is at a certain level, sort of a modern, cynical level, patriotic. He sees that he is actually quite conservative, but he's conservative socially as well as politically. His politics very much, and it is something which is common with a certain strain of modern American males, that, if he is either a Gen Z or a Gen A male. I'm not too sure which. But if you look at the politics of Gen Z males, they are much more conservative politically than any other generation. They are more conservative politically than the greatest the World War II generation.
They're more conservative than 70-year-old males, according to like a recent survey.
70-year-old males. And he has inculcated that as well. And that is something that you see, and yet at the same time, he's very nuanced, because he is the 70-year-old males, the 90-year-old males, the ones who grew up in the 1930s, and all the way up through the baby boomers. the only source of information that you had was the library or television, or radio. And he is somebody who has grown up with tremendous access to information. He, at some point, I think in the first book, is either musing or talking to somebody about the fact that when he was 4, he got a smartphone as part of the Obama phone program. And everybody, all of his friends, 4-year-old black males in the ghetto were doing what all their brothers and cousins were doing, which was they were downloading porn, because that's what a phone is for. They didn't, and he had learned how to read when he was 2, and the only access to books that he had occasionally in the different foster homes he was between 2 and 4 was the Bible. So he had read 3 different copies of the Bible over and over again, and he has an eidetic memory. So don't argue what's in the Bible with this guy. He will quote you chapter and verse from memory. Which version do you want, right? But then he got an Obama phone when he was 4, and all of a sudden the entire world of information was open to him. And he began studying intensively, which is why, he was doing calculus when he was 7. He was reading advanced, he was doing astrophysics at 10, and doing it well enough that he got a paper published, right? So this is a guy who is he is off the charts brilliant, raised in this horrific environment. His defects, as he puts it, or his defects folder is the War and Peace of child abuse. So he's a very screwed up character. He's a very screwed up guy who knows that he's screwed up and is trying really, really hard to be as normal as possible. And then he suddenly acquires superpowers. And it's like, well,
I can't hide anymore.
I can't hide anymore. His whole thing was he was going to get old enough that he could skip town and go live the life of an adult while still being a 13, 14-year-old. He was right at the edge of skipping town anyway, because he just wanted to get out. His whole goal in life is just to have a normal life. He wants to live in a suburb. He wants to live in a cookie cutter suburb where it's a high trust society, where your neighbors, and you don't have to worry about people just beating you down randomly because you're walking along the street, or just getting shot out of nowhere, which had happened to him several times growing up. And then there's the whole incident when he was 11, which we're just not even going to. This guy makes Kyle Rittenhouse look like a piker. Okay, because Kyle Rittenhouse was at least 17. He was 11 when he took on a whole drug gang. And, Kyle Rittenhouse didn't shoot any black people. Michael Edwards did.
Yeah, and shooting while white is never.
Shooting while white. Yeah, he was an 11-year-old kid, and it's like, oh, he's a racist, he's a white supremacist, and all this other stuff. No, I was just trying to stay alive, Mike. I didn't want to kill them all. I only wanted to kill 2 of them. And especially when he killed foremost, and he was the only one who survived.
That raises a great question, actually. So this book is coming out at a very interesting time in American culture.
Oh, yeah.
So you kind of had this pendulum swing way, way, way to the left, to the point. Well, I'm not going to get into that, where they're mutilating, and I'll just leave it at that. And then right now, it's kind of swinging in the other direction. So how does this thing fit into that cultural milieu? Let's call it.
Well, in that universe, Donald Spade, who is not at all Donald Trump, did in fact get assassinated. So there is no check on the left swing. So it continues to swing to the left, to the point of pushing towards civil war when the storm hits. and the storm kind of completely shakes everything up. And I'm not going to get into too much of that, because that's future books. But one of the things that's in the society is what everybody would refer to as the deep state or QAnon, or, and in this book, that's a very straightforward entity, as is their much more recent and not as powerful counter, which is Gondola. And Gondola is primarily electronic. They're literally a hacktivist organization, but an extremely large, secret, and powerful one. And so, in terms, it's very much set with the current politics. If anything, it's set slightly, because it was written in 2023. It's set slightly out of phase politics, but it does discuss a lot of that. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. And where did you get the term gondola? The reason I asked that is there was something called Project Gondola Wish that I think the DIA executed sometime in the 1970s.
Yeah.
And it was like a survey of their adversary psychic programs, believe it or not, like a real project.
Okay.
But where did gondola come from?
I literally just pulled it out of the air. The idea of gondola came from Shadowrun, the game Shadowrun, which is when you have one vast conspiracy, there is always either a or multiple conspiracies that counter that conspiracy. This is a book that has a lot of Shadowrun aspects. A lot of the things that are going on in the book are essentially what you would call Shadowrun quests. The operation at the end of the book, essentially a Shadowrun. It's a Shadowrun game. It's a Shadowrun quest, and so there are a lot of aspects of Shadowrun to it. But from the point of view of the name Gondola, I just grabbed it out of the air. I mean, that literally was just, what do I call these guys? I don't know. Gondola. That was it. It's not a reference to anything. One of the things about it is a group like that, like, to a certain extent, if the society exists, the society is pretty out there and open about what they're doing. If you pay any attention to it in that universe.
Yeah.
And I would argue in this one as well. They're pretty straightforward about, we're going to run the world and you're all going to eat bugs. Okay. We are.
John, you got to get it right. You got to get that one right. You will eat the bugs and you would be very happy.
Bugs, eat the bugs. You will own nothing and be happy. You will eat the bugs. Yeah. They're pretty straightforward about what the future is going to be, and you are going to accept it. Gondola, on the other hand, is really straightforward about, we don't freaking exist, okay? What is it about secret organization you do not understand? So if Gondola existed in this universe, you would not see any sign of them. Whereas the deep state, QAnon, all of that stuff, they're kind of out there and obvious. So
that's kind of interesting that you kind of pulled that out of nowhere. There's a very heavy child trafficking component to anti-child trafficking component to Gondola, and I thought that's what it was getting at, was basically it's their vehicle to safety, that's the Gondola that gets them out of those situations.
That's the answer. I thought it, and because Gondola is primarily an anti-trafficking organization. It is in the book. Gondola is primarily an anti-trafficking organization, although they do a lot of other things. But his argument for what the reason for that name, that sounds great. Yes, I thought that out. I thought about it for days and days and days. No, I just went, I need a name for these guys. Gatla. But that's actually great. That's your explanation, Casey, is would make me sound smart.
All right.
It's now firmly in the canon, Casey, and it has been done today, right here. You saw it, everyone. This is where it became canon.
Yeah, it just became canon. Sure, that's because I'm really, really smart. No, I'm not. I just went, I need a name for these guys. Gatla. Okay.
All right, both of you, what kind of books are you reading today? What kind of authors do you like? You know, to the extent that you have time.
Well, he's mostly been having to read me, God help him.
And I'm going to say that's kind of trickling over. I'm catching up on other Ringo series and things that I hadn't gotten to. I had extensively written Ringo, and I'm actually in one of his novels, as many people are, to be honest. But you know, I have kind of been all Ringo all the time for a few months now. I'm probably gonna have to take a break in the near future. But
are you the cleanup guy, the cleanup man? Is that that's a superhero name, right? As good as any, right?
The cleanup guy. Yeah, the cleaner.
I don't read very much these days. I used to read all the time. I would read just obsessively. I was like anybody else. A lot of the part of the brain that you want to fill with stories, when you're a writer, you fill with your own.
Mm-hmm.
And that is one of the reasons I don't read as much. Second reason I don't read as much, you might notice that I'm not wearing glasses. I need to get a new set of glasses. I just can't see very well. It's also one of the things that interferes with my writing because everything has got to be dialed up huge for me to be able to write. And the last reason that I don't is because I find myself unintentionally plagiarizing other writers if I read them. So I have a tendency these days to read nonfiction. So I've recently been on kind of a Pacific War kick. Silent Victory about submarines and world, which is a 1950s book that is one of these just detailed histories of submarine actions in World War II. The Ghost Mountain Boys about the first combat by the 32nd Infantry in New Guinea, which is just horrific. I have tremendous respect for all of the global war on terror vets. But if you think that anything that you went through was actually totally suck, you need to read the Ghost Mountain Boys and find out just how suck things can be. And then I read a whole series of books having to do with surface warfare actions in World War II, like Neptune's Inferno and Last Stand of the Tin Can Sailors. You want a really great Navy book, or you just like a good military book, Last Stand of the Tin Can Sailors is fantastic. And you very much come away from it with the firm opinion that Halsey should have been court-martialed. And the only reason you got away with it was because of so much security stuff that, and the fact that the Japanese admiral lost his nerve and turned around. The Battle of Samar was one of those things where it was a striking incompetence on the part of the American admiral was countered by striking cowardice on the part of the Japanese admiral. If the Japanese admiral had continued on, MacArthur's invasion fleet at Leyte would have been devastated. And here's the what if, right? The historical what if. Okay, so Battle of Samar, MacArthur is invading the Philippines at Leyte Gulf. And there are essentially three ways to get to the invasion fleet for the Japanese. One of them is San Bernardino Strait in the north, which is really, really narrow and twisty. One of them is, I can't remember the name of the strait, to the south. And the third is to come in from the Pacific, come in from the east side and come in from the Pacific. So the Japanese did this, as they always did, this very intricate plan where the main strike group would come through San Bernardino Strait. because, among other things, it could be partially covered by Japanese ground-based aircraft against American attacks. What the Japanese didn't grasp was that the Army's Air Force had been as brutalized as the Navy's Air Force, Japanese Navy's Air Force, so they really didn't have the cover. The carriers, which were essentially completely out of planes and crews, would just be coming in from the Pacific Ocean to the east to try to draw some of the American forces. And then a subsidiary old battleships would come up from the south as another feint to try to draw off some forces. So in the south, an admiral who should have been considered one of the greatest admirals of World War II, nobody has ever heard of, called either Oldendorf or Oldenburg, set up a beautiful ambush for these Japanese and it was all battleships, cruisers. It involved everything. It involved aircraft, it involved submarines, PT boats, destroyers, cruisers, and battleships, and crossed the Japanese T, blew the hell out of them. The one coming from the south. To the east, Japanese sent their carriers down, and Halsey, that freaking idiot, took his entire force and went out and chased the carriers, leaving the invasion fleet completely undefended. In the meantime, the Japanese coming down from the north, which is the main surface strike force that was supposed to do all the damage, had lost the Musashi to air attacks already. And so they had the Yamato. I'm doing this from memory, and my memory, as I've already said, is a little tricky, but either 8 or 9 heavy cruisers and 19 destroyers. So you've got the Yamato, a whole bunch of heavy cruisers, 19 destroyers coming down the San Bernardino Strait. Halsey was supposed to detach his battleships and leave them behind, what was called Task Force 93. Instead, he took the battleships with him because his thing was the planes would cripple the aircraft carriers, and then he would send his battleships in to finish them off. So this Japanese force deploys into Leyte Gulf. This massive, the largest Japanese surface force ever sent, deploys into Leyte Gulf, and there is no defenses. There are no defenses for the invasion fleet, except for Taffy 1, 2, and 3, which are Jeep carriers, which are Liberty ships that have been converted to carriers that have no speed at all, no defenses, no nothing. 3 destroyers and 6 destroyer escorts. And the carrier commanders screamed to have the destroyers and destroyer escorts lay down smoke while they get up to steam and kind of trying to get away from these battleships and cruisers and destroyers coming down on. And at a certain point, there was maybe a little miscommunication, and one of the destroyers turned around, commanded by Ernest Ernst, a Sioux warrior. And he turns around and lays down smoke and goes to flank speed straight at the Japanese. And at a certain point, all of them turn around and head towards the Japanese. All of these little tiny ships up against these huge ships. And of course, they get the crap blown out of them. But along the way, Ernest Ernst actually took his destroyer using guns, took a Japanese heavy cruiser out of the battle, right? Which destroyers can't take out a cruiser. It's just, right. They can do it with torpedoes, but not with their guns, for God's sakes. He took them out with his guns and, of course, was eventually obliterated. Got the Medal of Honor. But it's what if, it's one of those, nobody's really covered it. What if they had actually left our battleships behind along with the crews that accompany the battleships, and we would have actually had a toe-to-toe battle between Iowa-class battleships and the Yamato. What's really stupid about what Halsey did from the point of view of Halsey's brain was that would have been the greatest battle ever.
Yeah.
All right.
Anyway,
last question.
Anyway, that's the kind of stuff that I have been reading lately.
Okay. Last question. Where can folks find this book, and when is it going to be available? It's probably more Casey than or John.
Currently available in eARC on the Bain website. It is available as an ebook, or it will be available soon on the Bain website, and of course through the Borg. But in May it comes out with anywhere that you can find fine books. So, and go out and pre-order it, please. If you're watching this, do a pre-order, because pre-orders help us boost our sales. The book has to be available for people to buy it. Mm-hmm. And if you do pre-orders, they have a tendency to order more and put more in bookstores and make them more available. So please do a pre-order.
Yep.
Yeah.
And
so you heard that here.
It will be on Podium as well, Podium Audio.
Right, it's Podium. That was the
Podium, yeah.
So it will be coming out on Podium, which I had never heard of before.
No, yeah, I've used them for most of our audiobooks but it will then be on Audible. It's just being developed by Podium.
So it's produced by Podium.
Produced by Podium, and they do put out but it will then be available on Audible.
Okay.
And probably other sites, or other audiobook sites as well.
All right, so you heard it here first. Pre-order as soon as this airs. Not That Kind of Good Guy. And thank you, John. Thank you, Casey. It's been an absolute pleasure.
All right. Thank you, Sean.
And now, as promised, one jump ahead. John Moore is a nanotech-enhanced soldier of fortune. Lobo is an AI, a living weapons and intelligence platform of enormous destructive potential. Two very dangerous wolves in a galaxy of deadly corporate and paramilitary predators. But Moore has grown weary of the killing, and just once he'd like to finish a job without leaving a trail of blood behind him. Not going to happen. Not on a pristine planet called Mackin, where two gigantic corporations vie for control of the local jump gate and access to the riches of an undeveloped world. Dealing with a kidnapping and extortion scheme is only the beginning for Moore and Lobo as they work to stay one jump ahead.
Wasn't smart enough to trust to understand clever repartee. That leaves option 3. Show them you're serious. I hate tapping the various forms of ugliness inside me, but sometimes it's necessary. The stupidity of these men was angering me, and I didn't want to yield to the anger. I kept to my resolve not to hurt them if I could possibly avoid it. I concentrated instead on giving them a simple but, I hoped, persuasive demonstration. I spit in my hands, gathered some dirt, and molded it into a ball roughly the size of my fist. I focused, and the nanomachines in my spit and skin oil responded. In a few seconds, they had transformed the dirt into a barely visible gray cloud swirling in front of me, about 1 meter high and half a meter wide, maybe 10 centimeters thick. It resembled a small bit of mist still clinging to the moist pre-dawn air. I don't know what combination of Jenny's changes and the experiments on Agro make it possible for me to let out and control the nanomachines, but I long ago stopped caring. I thought my instructions at the cloud, and a moment later it floated quietly upward, a sheet of darker air moving in the deep gray of the starlit night. The screams started 3 seconds after it reached the top of the pit. Lobo broke in. "What did you do?" 3 had drawn guns, but the guns vanished. "Later," I murmured. I'd instructed the cloud to find and absorb all the metal within a 10-meter radius, then disassemble and drop. In the darkness, the gardeners would know only that their guns and knives and belt buckles and anything else metal had dissolved before their eyes. Anyone in a group this naive was likely to be a Mackin native and consequently be unfamiliar with the latest in corporate weaponry. They'd have no clue if a satellite laser or a sniper zapped them, or how the zapping even worked. So the attack would be all the more terrifying for being inexplicable. The screams had mostly stopped, though one or two gardeners couldn't seem to shut up. "You're okay," I yelled. "For now. We dissolved only your weapons, this time." I paused until they were quiet. "Two are running back to their camp," Lobo said in my ear. I stood and spoke clearly and slowly, but not loudly. "Why don't you four toss a rope in here and pull me up? We can settle this back at your camp and no one will get hurt." In less than 10 seconds, the end of a rope came over the side and bounced against the wall across from me, less than a meter off the ground and easy to grab. I pulled to test it, and the rope gave a bit. "Hold tight," I said. "You wouldn't want to drop me. I might get upset." I tested the rope again. Much better. I grabbed it with both hands and quickly crabbed up the wall into the open air. All four were holding the rope. As soon as I was standing on my own, they dropped it and backed away until they were all leaning against a tree about 3 meters in front of me. The jungle was quieter than it had been earlier, almost still save for the heavy breathing and other sounds we intruders emitted. The stars still shined brightly, the flowers still gleamed, and I almost wished these men could relax enough to enjoy the evening. Almost. "Nice night for a walk. Why don't we head to your camp and finish this? We don't want to miss my morning deadline." No one moved. "Really," I said. "It's time to go." The man farthest to my right nodded and motioned for me to follow. Without a word, he took off, the others behind him. I trailed the group. No point in letting any stragglers slip behind me. We walked in silence to their camp, though we had to cover only a couple of clicks. Even in the relatively sparse undergrowth of the rainforest, the walk was slow going. They made it slower, not wanting to show up without their weapons, and with me walking freely. I couldn't blame them. So I didn't push them. When we were close enough that I could hear voices from the camp and see some of its lights, the leader stopped and said, "Wait here, okay?" "Sure," I said. Scared and calm would be easier to handle than scared and angry. As I stood there, I murmured an update request to Lobo.
This has been the Bane Free Radio Hour. Thanks for joining us at the heart of science fiction. Join us next week for part 12 of One Jump Ahead by Mark Van Dame, and our next interview when Griffin Barber talks to Bane's summer lineup of fantasy authors. Wen Spencer, Casey Azell, A.C. Haskins, Marisa Wolf, and Melissa Altoff are all here to talk about their amazing novels you're sure to go feral for. Score by Ruth Judkowitz.